Eisenhower years from 1952 to 60. Not much older than John F. Kennedy. He was after he was done being vice president, he became the governor of California, for a while. And then in 1968, the Republicans are looking for somebody that can win. And the opportunity is great because the Democrats are split in so many ways. Now, what's interesting, we're going to talk about this. In this election, the 68 election is so big for today because it tells you what's going to happen, in my opinion, for future years to come in American history and American elections. Now, here's the thing. The Republicans typically get all these states, right? Most of them. I mean, they don't always win all these states, but they always seem to do really well out here in the West. They typically do today really well in the South. And why is that? It has to do with 1968. What President Nixon was going to do to try to win the election is something called the Southern Strategy. He was going to try to appeal to, and this is what the Southern Strategy is. The Southern Strategy is to appeal to Democrats in the South who are disillusioned with the civil rights movement, who felt that Johnson and Kennedy gave away too much to, the civil rights movement in terms of legislation, and they weren't comfortable with that. They weren't comfortable with the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and so on. And so all those disgruntled Democrats that are very conservative socially, Richard Nixon's party knows this, and so what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to capitalize on that. Now, in the election, you got an American independent guy named George Wallace. George Wallace was the former governor of Alabama. He was quoted as saying, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. That's who George Wallace was. So you can see that these states kind of voted with that segregation idea, the Deep South. Well, all those states are going to vote Republican from basically henceforth. Because, again, this is a one-shot deal. There's not going to be any American independence anymore ruling the South. It's all going to be Republican. Again, disgruntled conservative Democrats are going to join up with the Republicans. And who are these people? They're very conservative socially. They believe in, God and guns. You know what I'm saying? You're not threatened when you got a Bible and a gun because people are scared of either one. You know what I'm saying? Okay. These people are probably, I don't mean to label people but overwhelmingly the idea is that socially conservative, they're not comfortable with stuff like women's rights, gay marriage, homosexual rights, all that kind of stuff. They're very traditional in mindset. And Nixon appeals to those people, and not only those people, but what he called middle America. Okay? And people look like this. Now just look at these people. They're just like good. It's like Leave It to Beaver here, right? And there was actually a movement back in those days, which was kind of a reaction to all of the anti-war protests and the hippies and the long hair and stuff, and they were called the Up With People movement. And in fact, they even came out with an album, which is really funny. You should listen to it sometime. It's kind of funny. You can YouTube that. Anyways, a reaction against, and overwhelmingly white. You don't see any people of color here, because that's not middle America. These are the hardworking, tax-paying Americans that play by the rules, try to do the things that they need to do in order to achieve. Their kids might be in Vietnam, but they support the government, they support the war. They see the anti-war movement as a bunch of long-haired, hippie, pot-smoking, tofu-eating, Birkenstock wearing, Tower District hanging out people who just, no, I'm sorry. No, but that's how they would, No, I'm just playing. If that's you, sorry. I'm just sorry. No, but that's what's going on. It's like this kind of animosity and stuff against those folks. And so Nixon is going for them. He's going for the South. And God knows it worked. Very famous catchphrase in the election is called peace with honor. Nixon basically said, hey, we know we're not gonna lose the war in Vietnam. Now, okay, we're not gonna lose. No, it's gonna be peace with honor in Vietnam. In other words, we're gonna get out of Vietnam and take all the troops, send them back to America, and turn the war over to the South Vietnamese. It's gonna be a terrible idea because the South Vietnamese will soon lose the Vietnam War and Vietnam will become communist. But Nixon knows that this war has to be ended. And so that's one reason why people elect him, to get out of Vietnam. Peace with honor just means that basically it's his way of saying, yeah, we're going to lose, but we're not going to lose that much. We're going to get out gracefully. We know we're done, and let's just end it. The last thing, I kind of alluded to this already, but Nixon tried to also appeal to folks I call the silent majority. Your textbook calls them the silent majority. Every person calls them. The silent majority are these people, you know, the hardworking, tax-paying Americans that aren't out in the streets protesting, patriotic, sense of duty, sense of righteousness, overwhelmingly white, beaver cleaver, suburban home, Clovis living, you know, people like that. No, I'm just kidding. See, now I'm thinking all kinds of horrible stereotypes. But anyways, just a little fun with that. But that's Nixon for you. Now, Nixon's big ideas during his term, he comes into the presidency in some ways as the worst possible candidate you can get because he's so divisive. And in the Nixon years, the Nixonian years, what's that? The Nixonian years. Sounds like a British guy doing a documentary. A very divided America, so divided. We have identity politics. Identity politics means that every ethnic group is pushing for policies that benefit their identity. You have the African Americans pushing for policies that benefit them. You've got feminism starting up, the women's movement, okay? You've got in late 1960s, the Chicano movement, which is basically Mexican Americans pushing for civil rights. It's crazy. You've got the Black Panthers, all right? You know who they are, right? They're definitely down for something. You've got the Black Panthers. You've got the Gray Panthers, who are like old people advocates, you know. You've got the openly gay Pink Panthers. You got the Yellow Panthers, who are fighting for Asian American rights. It's that kind of society where everybody is divided among ethnic lines, you know what I mean? And pushing for policies that benefit their identity and who they identify with. It's a time of young versus old. You've got the hippies and the counterculture and the young people that are protesting the Vietnam War versus the old, who are like, you know, the silent majority people, the up with people crowd, the conflict between generations. Okay? And the last thing is basically this. There's equal rights movements that are sprouting up during the late 1960s. And we just have this sort of like, it's like the 60s were a Pandora's box, you know what I mean? Like, you open it up and you don't know what's going to happen, but it explodes. And it explodes into all these protest movements. People trying to identify with who they are and pushing for policies that identify with that and all this kind of stuff. And President Nixon represents not that, he's not really somebody that's pushing for civil rights. He's a conservative Republican, which basically means less government. He's not for all of this. And in some ways, he was probably the worst president to be elected for the time. I wouldn't say that he was exactly supremely open-minded, but he was a person that probably looked at some of these folks that were very radical as enemies of the state. Okay? And one thing about President Nixon is that he was a very paranoid man, probably to the point of insanity, quite frankly. Okay? So, what are some things happening along the generational lines? The generational divide, the gap. Oh man, it's really, yeah. I think for a lot of families it was probably hard. You're growing up in Ohio, you pay your taxes, you do your work, you go to your job 9 to 5, and your kid's going to Woodstock. And they're listening to Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, and they are burning draft cards at a protest rally, and you're paying for their college education. Yeah, you'd be a little bit PO'd. I know I would if that was my kid. I'd be like, what are you doing? Right? I'd still love him though, but I'd be mad at him, So there's a lot of that going on, right? So this is the early 70s, late 60s. Now, stuff the video didn't necessarily go on into. Let's talk a little bit about this. So you've got this generational gap, and let's start out with the youth culture. The youth culture in the late 60s. So it all starts kind of with a culture that says, hey, look, we're not going to be silent. It's not going to be like the 50s. We're not Beaver Cleaver here. We're going to speak out for our rights. We're going to have a voice. And some examples of this are what you call the new left. Okay, now in politics you have the left and the right. The right is the really conservative. The left is really liberal. These are young people that are more free with their beliefs. They would say more open-minded, more identifying with even past what the Democrats want to do to help society. They believe that government they need to question the government. These are the people called SDS, the Students for a Democratic Society, who are starting in the Bay Area, Berkeley, to be more specific, but spreading that movement throughout the United States. This whole movement of questioning your leaders, questioning authority, getting out there and protesting authority, and not just going along with what the government says. These are the people that instigate the anti-war rallies. The free speech movement is related to that too. That's a similar movement that throughout college campuses throughout the United States are saying that they should be allowed to say whatever they'd like to and speak on pretty much any issue, as many colleges back then didn't like that. They didn't like being spoken out upon. And of course, opposition to the draft was huge. You see this guy burning this draft card. These movements were very much a part of society back then. And I think, again, if you were a member of middle America and your kids are off in college doing this kind of stuff, and you're paying for their education, you can see how they would be kind of mad at this. But if you're a student at this point and you're involved with these things, you're just saying, hey, look, we're protesting for the right things in our society. Freedom of speech, peace in Vietnam, not fighting